Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to this special broadcast on Sansad TV. I am Teena Jha. The 18th G20 Summit held under India's presidency concluded last week with world leaders and geopolitical experts hailing it as a resounding success. The New Delhi Declaration was passed unanimously with 100% consensus, something that's being described as a huge diplomatic victory for India. Overcoming major differences, India got consensus on all 83 paras of the Delhi Declaration, which addresses political, economic and environmental challenges facing the world today. The action plan of the G20 in addressing these challenges, the impact and implications on the future of the people and India's presidency in giving the bloc a strong direction towards promoting growth and development worldwide. These are some of the aspects that we will discuss on the show today. With a very eminent guest joining us on the program, I'm pleased to welcome on this special broadcast Mr. Suman Bery, Vice Chairperson, NITI Aayog. Thank you, sir, for your time. Welcome to Sansad TV.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Let me begin by asking you, the 18th G20 Summit under India's presidency has been hailed as a big success for multiple reasons. What has been the biggest takeaway for you particularly?
Most people have focused on the fact that there was consensus, and that itself was a huge achievement. But I'm a development economist, and I would like to talk to the economic dimensions rather than the diplomatic dimensions. But let me just say, it is a feather in the cap of the Prime Minister, because it's only now with that success one sees how patiently and systematically that was built up to. Okay, and so it wasn't easy going. But I think what's very important for the world is that the G20 was salvaged, because had it not been for his efforts, that of his team, the Sherpa, the world could not afford to lose the G20 as a forum at this particularly troubled time. So I think that that is a huge achievement, that this forum, in very difficult circumstances, was recognized as being a forum for debating and sorting out and providing propulsion to the issues that really face the world. And that, I think, is a testament to India's leadership and to India's credibility.
You're right. In fact, before the summit began, a lot of geopolitical experts said this is the toughest G20 summit amid deep geopolitical divide, the differences within the G20, the consensus then finally that India managed to build is being hailed as a huge success. Okay, let's now begin talking about the 37-page Delhi Declaration, which covers a whole range of issues from finance to healthcare. So let's talk about some of the significant ones from India's perspective, sir. The G20 leaders have committed to strengthen the multilateral development banks. If you could explain to us and our viewers about the roadmap that has been adopted in the Delhi Declaration, especially in the area of capital adequacy, on the issues of governance of these multilateral development banks, etc.
It is part of a larger framing in the Delhi Declaration of reforming multilateralism. And what does that mean? What that means is that the global both political and economic architecture still dates back to the Second World War. And these institutions have the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, the UN specialized agencies, have not been as agile as in responding to the new needs of the global economy. Now, the particular focus that began under the Indonesian presidency was the area that you have mentioned, which is that we have existing institutions, the multilateral development bank family, and the lead has been taken by the first of these, the World Bank, but there are, I believe, something like 40 multilateral development banks around the world, regional development banks, funds, etc. But the whole if you like, family was looked at to begin with under the Italian presidency, then the Indonesian presidency, to ask whether they were being too conservative in the use of capital. Now, what does capital mean? Is shareholders put money in there, which is then used to support bonds that are sold, and certainly the World Bank and most of the other institutions have been very concerned to maintain the top credit rating called AAA, because that then allows their borrowers, countries like India and certainly to, as it were, benefit from borrowing at much better terms than they could on their own. So it is like a mutual fund or a mutual insurance operation. And so the argument was that these, in order to protect their AAA, these institutions were being too conservative, and a study was done which has now been given support that they should, to use they should sweat their capital harder for a range of reasons, including not only assisting individual countries in their transitions, but also what are called global public goods. What this therefore means is that up till now, there's only a minor amount that the rich countries, who are the major shareholders, China is an important shareholder as well, are not being asked to go to their legislatures for a lot of new money. The banks are being asked to be creative in having a bigger development impact with their existing funding.
So let's see how they move forward towards the implementation of this idea. But the Delhi Declaration, sir, also endorsed India's idea to monitor the risks that are associated with the fast-paced growth of the crypto asset ecosystem. That is something that was spoken about prominently. To begin with, tell us and our viewers first about the challenges that are rapidly evolving in this sector, and what kind of framework now has India proposed for the supervision and regulation of all the activities related to the crypto assets?
Well, I mean, this is up till now a largely unregulated industry, and it has been based in the belief that central banks and sovereigns at the end of the day are subject to political pressures, and that a monetary or payment system which was outside the control of governments was in some ways more bulletproof than national monetary systems. I can say that two things have turned out to be the case. One is that this has been, it's not particularly a means of payment. It's largely a way of holding assets, although there is a form of crypto called stable coins. But its characteristic has been anonymity. And anonymity of payments is something that is prone to abuse. So, for example, a lot of these ransomware attacks that have taken place, settlement has been in crypto, because by design there can be no tracking of who gets the money. So, look, I mean, it's an electronic version of the role, in some ways, gold has performed over the years. Completely liquid, well, but you know, a store of value as long as you were sure of the fineness of the gold. Now, what has India been concerned about, and what has it been successfully arguing for? And this is no longer a minor part of the global financial system, and India turns out to be quite an important part of this ecosystem and of this financial system, and it has been a source of concern to the Indian authorities, because you know, we are in a difficult neighborhood, terrorism is an issue, you know, etc. So India pressed very hard, and in this area, along others, I think is seen by many as prescient in indicating that, look, you know, you must find a way of regulating it, because there are risks to financial stability, there are risks, there are opportunities for crime. And I think that what I heard from some of the participants at the meeting is that Indian leadership was really quite important to push this issue on the agenda.
Another idea that sailed through and that was welcomed by the G20 leaders was the adoption of digital public infrastructure to bridge the digital divide, accelerate global development. Now, this has been one area where India has seen rapid and unprecedented transformation, the digital transformation of the kind that we've seen over the last decade or so. How do we look to develop, deploy, and also the governance of DPI for global good?
Firstly, I think the G20 summit coming soon after our success with Chandrayaan 3 has made the world sit up and say, look, there is real capability here. And so, and there's no shame to this, quite the opposite. This was a way of demonstrating, in a sense, what the capacities and capabilities are. But I do think, Teena, a very important dimension of our digital public infrastructure is that it has been a very important demonstration of the public and private sectors working together. So it became possible because of Aadhaar and identity. It then was the basis of what became the India Stack, but there was tremendous both technical and regulatory innovation by the Reserve Bank of India, by the National Payments Corporation of India, to, as it were, and then by, if you like, the Paytms, etc., building upon that. So, all of this was to some extent happening in the shadows because a lot of people were equally or more impressed by what was going on with China, with Alibaba, Alipay, etc. So this was a kind of coming out party for what we had been doing. Point number one. Point number two is that it is in the way that we talk about the influence of the dollar as a means of payment. If these standards, and the modern world is about standards, get accepted in a wide range of countries, let's say the African Union, then that is going to be good for them, it's going to be good for India. And so that is how showcasing it at the G20 helps India.
India has also sought new financing instruments to steer the sustainable development goals. What are these new instruments of financing that we're talking about? And also the fact that, that there's a huge development funding gap. So how do we ensure that in the times to come, the time is running out, we ensure that this funding is met, especially for the developing world?
This is a very intricate and complicated issue. So if I could just provide an overall framework. So the energy transition and adaptation, as it were, has at the, if you like, at the receiving country end, a public dimension and a private dimension. Much of the private infrastructure that is going up in wind, renewable, solar PV, all of this is actually being done by the private sector. Very unlike what the old model was with thermal power, where NTPC and state electricity boards. So that they have financing needs in the private sector. However, government has financing needs also because, for example, building out the grid in order to accommodate renewables or restructuring transport arrangements, moving away from coal, those have an impact, in India's case, on the union government, but they have an impact on state governments as well. So on the recipient side, there's a public and a private side. And on the, if you like, source side, there's a public side, and that's what the multilateral development banks is about. But the big money has to go from the private sector in where the pools of capital are to our private sector, and that's not happening in sufficient volume and sufficiently fast. So that's the, as it were, the bottleneck that needs to be resolved. Now, the two things can work together because there are ways in which the multilateral banks can harness their now additional capital to take some of the risk out of the private sector source going to the private sector destination. And so this is part of the architecture that India, through the G20, is attempting now to develop, and it's about what the technical term is risk mitigation. So there's a belief that the projects themselves are not more risky, but there's a perception of additional risk, and what is it that you can do to, as it were, alleviate that perception so that funds that flow quite freely to Europe or in the US, etc., they could flow to where the real needs are.
Aside the Delhi declarations, a lot was also happening in terms of the IMEC corridor, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. It's very significant in terms of the shifting global dynamics, in terms of connectivity, but in terms of economic development, how does it gain? How does India gain from this corridor?
We are engaged in a free trade agreement with Europe, okay? And so, I mean, China has been putting a lot of resources into a land corridor from Xi'an, I think it is, to Duisburg in Germany. Now, you know, our existing sort of trade with Europe tends to go through the Suez Canal. This probably bypasses that, but I think that the point is to have alternatives, okay? And I think this is not unconnected with the fact that His Highness Mohammed bin Salman, you know, turned this into a state visit. So partly, as we saw in Johannesburg in the BRICS summit, and partly as this IMEC indicates, countries of the Gulf are hedging their bets. They know, at least the oil exporters, the gas exporters, UAE, we've got now a trade agreement with the UAE. So this is, to me, very much a cementing in an agreement of a relationship that has been deepening with Saudi Arabia. So that's also important. It ends up, I think I'm right in saying, in Greece at the port of Piraeus. And that's not insignificant because Piraeus is actually also, I think, operated by a Chinese. So there was this, the Belt and Road, if you recall, has a maritime dimension. So to some extent, this is, as it were, providing alternatives. And I think that that is a underlying theme of the development declaration, that India is now mature enough, bold enough, and respected enough to offer alternatives that the world takes seriously. And I don't think one should underestimate that, and I don't think one should underestimate how much that owes to the farsightedness of our Prime Minister.
Absolutely, you're right. And what about the Global Biofuels Alliance? We've started it with a couple of countries, but it's a significant move towards sustainability, but will it also help accelerate energy transition?
This is one more alternative, let me put it that way, in exploiting a resource that India has. The other is the sun. So we were pioneers with the Solar Alliance, and now we are, you know, in a sense, wanting to be at the cutting edge of what's happening with biofuels. Because again, you know, we have, as it were, the raw material, we have the, the technology, I think, is more advanced in the US, in Brazil. So again, it's a way of signaling and then benefiting from the fact that we want to be in various ways at the cutting edge of the new technologies that will displace particularly imported hydrocarbons, hydrogen, possibly small modular reactors, which are also mentioned there, electric vehicles and their batteries, the sun, and biofuels. Having said all that, because I want to remind you and your viewers that while Indians are right to want to see what the advantage is for India, this was India acting as it should, as the fifth largest, soon to be the third largest economy, as setting direction for the globe. Okay? And so that is the right perspective within which to see these initiatives.
Towards setting the right direction, it takes me to the next question, and I would like to get your thoughts on it, because you've also written about the role of women in development. This was one of the priorities under India's G20 presidency, to mainstream gender. We talked about how we moved from women development to women-led development. You also earlier this year wrote an article about how there is a need to make Nari Shakti the enabler of development in this Amrit Kal. So what exactly have we done over the last couple of years, and what are our future plans to ensure that gender is mainstream, so it's not just words, but we're also following it up with action?
Do you mean at the global or the national level?
At the national level.
Let me just focus on women-led development. What does that require, and what is it that is being done? So it is the reality for India that women play multiple roles. They are homemakers, they are mothers, they often are very active on the farm. And the issue really is how to complement these activities with their need for their own autonomy and for the nation, with their, if you like, business and entrepreneurial abilities and capabilities. Now, this is both an economic and in many ways a social and a sociological challenge. And I think that by focusing on this as a strong element of Viksit Bharat, the Prime Minister is putting it into the national debate. Now, there are credit schemes, there's small, much of what has been happening actually in agriculture also ends up assisting women. So, for example, in managing livestock. So there's a kind of urban and modern dimension to this, and there is a more rural traditional dimension to this. So you've given me a good idea, which is that we should actually, do more research on how broad spectrum schemes actually work for women. And I would put this, I would frame this also in a different way, which is that Prime Minister does not actually believe in, as it were, specific handouts. He believes in creating conditions so that people can sort of live their own lives. But I would not deny that there are, headwinds that face women, and so clearing those headwinds and then providing a level playing field, I think, is.
We'll talk about some of the headwinds and the challenges that we as a country face as we head towards 2047, and the target is to make India Viksit Bharat. What are some of the challenges that we'll still face? What are some of the sectors that you specifically think India needs to focus on to achieve this desired target?
I think the sectors will only become clear with hindsight. I don't know that sitting in 2000 we would have anticipated this vibrant IT sector, but we created the conditions for it. And I think that that really is India's genius. which is that we have entrepreneurship. What we do now have is, as it were, other institutions, particularly deeper financial markets. That said, it is, I would say, both agriculture and manufacturing are areas of enormous unrealized potential. And I do want to stress that agriculture can be as much a sunrise sector. It is not a sunset sector in terms of its contribution to output, contribution to income, contribution to exports. There are miracles happening in Indian agriculture at the moment, as I'm informed by my senior colleague, Dr. Chand. So let's not lose sight, I mean, of agriculture. And it is also going to be impacted by, for example, what we're doing with biofuels and what have you. Now, in manufacturing, I think there are multiple reasons why we want to be successful in manufacturing. Security reasons as much as employment reasons. But what we are at heart is a labor abundant society, economy. This exhibits itself in the fact of our migrant flows. It exhibits itself in our IT sector. So that to me will remain a constant for the next 20 or 30 years.
And especially when we have the largest youth population in the country. Before we wrap up, sir, I'll take one last question from you. On the opportunities that we are creating, some of the newer initiatives that NITI Aayog is perhaps taking to ensure that that this particular segment of our population acts as a catalyst of the transformation that we want to see by 2047. So since its inception, we've seen how NITI Aayog has transformed the lives of people. The ease of living that we are seeing today has happened because of several initiatives. But in the times to come, this drive has to continue.
Oh, no, I fully agree. So the question, so we already can see, as it were, how successfully India has harnessed what I might call the semiconductor revolution for development. Okay? We are on the verge, I'm told, by more knowledgeable people than myself, on the verge of a revolution just as substantial with AI. Okay? So I think that India's, as it were, opportunity, genius would be to actually think of ways of harnessing AI for solving India's problems. You asked a question about youth. We are already very active through our Atal Innovation Mission in creating a vibrant startup culture, and one of the achievements of NITI Aayog in India is that there is now an engagement group called Startup 20. And so the notion that the world of the future will not necessarily only be the world of large corporations, multinationals, but would be a world of vibrant entrepreneurs, including in India, including in the South. That is part of the potential of our digital public infrastructure. But let me also say that NITI Aayog is doing quite a bit of thinking on the intersection between youth, particularly adolescence, and health, because there are a lot of unaddressed issues for youth, which technology will now allow us to, including digital health, to address, including mental health, including anemia, including substance abuse and addiction.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but that having been said, we'll have to wind up the program, sir. Okay. Time allows me to take up only that much on this edition of Samvaad Exclusive. It's been a delight speaking to you about the unique aspects of India's G20 presidency, about the key priorities of the New Delhi leaders' declaration, and also about the focus areas that India will have to work on to achieve the Vision 2047. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you for being so well prepared. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So that's it from us on this broadcast, viewers. Thank you very much for your time as well.